When you say the president made clear that U.S. policy with respect to Gaza will be determined by our assessment of Israel's immediate action, could you decode that for us? What exactly is the warning that's being issued here?
I think it's very clear in the language itself, Nancy. We're looking for concrete steps to alleviate humanitarian suffering in Gaza. Again, I won't get ahead of what the Israelis will or won't say or announce. We're looking for concrete steps to be announced here soon. And it's not just about the announcement of concrete steps and changes in their policies, but it's the execution of those announcements and those decisions and implementing them. And so we obviously will watch closely and monitor how they do on the commitments that they make. And as I said earlier, if there's no changes to their policy and their approaches, then there's going to have to be changes to ours.
I think what the world wants to understand is the White House warning that it may remove military aid? What exactly is the threat here?
I think I've stated it pretty clearly, and I'm not gonna, as I said earlier, I'm not gonna preview steps. I'm not gonna preview decisions that haven't been made yet. But there are things that need to be done. There are too many civilians being killed. The risk to aid workers is unacceptable. Now we have certain aid organizations that are reconsidering whether they're even going to be able to continue operations in Gaza while famine looms. So there has to be tangible steps. Let's see what they announce. Let's see what they direct. Let's see what they do. But I'm not going to get ahead of that.
I'm going to try this one more time because the president.
I reckon you would.
That's what we do. The president seems to have said to the prime minister today, make these concrete changes or else. It's the or else that I want to make clear here. Is the president threatening to withhold aid to Israel if they do not make these changes?
The president made it clear that our policies with respect to Gaza will be dependent upon our assessment of how well the Israelis make changes and implement changes to make the situation in Gaza better for the Palestinian people.
And how much time are you giving them to make these changes, to implement these concrete
Again,
steps?
we would hope to see some announcements of changes here in coming hours and days, and I'll leave it at that.
That's short.
Hours and days.
John, why today?
Why today? What? Why today for the phone call? Why
this apparent shift in policy today?
I think, look, President, well, all of us, but particularly the president, was certainly shaken by the attack on the WCK convoy and the aid workers. As I said earlier, it wasn't the only event. There had been others like that, humanitarian aid convoys coming under fire and losing people. And the president felt strongly that it was time to talk to Prime Minister Netanyahu about his concerns.
Would you characterize this call as an ultimatum?
I would characterize this call as very direct, very businesslike, very professional on both sides. And the president laid out his significant concerns about the direction and where things are going. And quite frankly, laid out, as is clear in the readout, that we are willing to reconsider our own policy approaches here, dependent upon what the Israelis do or don't do.
Can you just tell us who all was on the call?
Well, it was a bilateral call between the two leaders, Prime Minister Netanyahu and the president. They were the only two speakers on the call.
But Vice President Harris also dialed in?
Vice President Harris did dial in, yes. Secretary of State dialed in, Jake Sullivan, yes. I don't know who was also listening in on the Israeli side, but the discussion was between the two leaders.
MJ.
So, Admiral, you're not specifying what concrete steps Israel must take exactly.
I gave you a broad sense of it. We want to see more crossings opened up. We want to see more trucks getting in, particularly from Jordan. We want to see tangible steps at the mitigation of civilian harm, particularly to humanitarian aid workers, but obviously all civilians. But we want to see that they have moved forward on proper steps to deconflict with aid workers as they move around, that the information flow is viable.
Sure, but that's language we've heard for weeks now. You're not talking about sort of telling us how exactly you will measure those measurable steps, right?
what I said was, we're going to examine our policy approaches based on our assessment of the way the Israeli side modifies their behavior, modifies their policy and decision-making processes. And so, first of all, let's see what they say they're going to do, and then let's watch and see how they execute to what they say. And I don't want to get ahead of them on what they plan to say about the changes they're going to make, but we'll base our policy decisions based on an assessment of how they execute to their policy decisions.
And you're not talking about what potential U.S. policy changes are on the table. Can you say whether the president shared that with the prime minister on this phone call?
The president made clear that absent changes in the protection of civilians on the ground, absent changes to the volume of humanitarian assistance getting in, absent any movement on a ceasefire that will allow hostages to get out and more aid to get in, absent a calming down, that he will have to reconsider his own policy choices with respect to Gaza.
And one of the 7 aid workers was obviously a dual American citizen. Did the prime minister offer the president an apology?
I'll let the prime minister speak to his side of the conversation. I would note that the Israeli Defense Forces, their Southern Command commander, has made a public apology for the strike.
And there was no mention of Rafah in this readout. Can you talk to us about how, if that did come up, and how that might have been discussed between the two?
This conversation was focused primarily on the need to get a temporary ceasefire in place, the need for there to be a pause in the fighting, so that we can get the hostages out, humanitarian assistance, the need to see that steps are being taken to learn from this strike and to make changes in the way civilian harm is mitigated from an operational perspective. And they did spend time, as the readout makes clear, talking about the very public threats from Iran to Israel. And the president, as I said, made very clear to the prime minister that the United States' support for Israel's ability to defend itself from a range of threats, not just Hamas, remains ironclad.
Good, Danny.
Thanks, Green. Thanks, Admiral. Just a couple of things. Firstly, how long did this call last?
It was about 30 minutes or so.
And just going back to, Jeff's question about the, why this sort of change in tone? I mean, has there been growing frustration on the part of President Biden that previous messaging to Prime Minister Netanyahu just doesn't seem to have gotten through?
Yes, there's been growing frustration.
Thank you so much, Karim. John, one question on Israel and another on Venezuela. We saw in the past President Biden pushing Netanyahu to protect civilians, but how much words really matter here when, on actions, the same day of the attack on the humanitarian wards, the U.S. was approving more bombs to Israel? We are now 6 months into the war. How much the U.S. actions are actually encouraging Israel to not do enough to protect civilians?
Yeah, look, I'm kind of glad the question came up because I would tell you, when I've seen press reporting, about the arms sales and that kind of thing, and I would just remind you that with the exception of the immediate 2 months after the attack, we haven't really sent emergency aid and military assistance to Israel. There was in the first couple of months. But what you're seeing here is the result of a process of foreign military sales to Israel that takes years. And a lot of this material that's been reported publicly was notified to Congress many, many months, if not years ago, and are in the train to get to Israel. I think it's important to remember, as I tried to mention in the last answer, that Israel still has a lot of threats it faces. I mean, we're all focused on Hamas, and I understand that, but they still face active threats throughout the region, including from Iran. And the United States still has an ironclad commitment to help Israel with its self-defense. And so a lot of these articles, including the 2,000-pound bombs and the F-35s, those are things that have been long in the train and not tied. The foreign military sales process was not tied to this conflict.